Hey, my name is Dave, and welcome to the premiere episode of Dave's Got Feelings. So, this is going to be a quick, well, not really so quick, I do love to talk, but an introduction video into why I felt the need to do this. And what I'm going to do in this video is essentially three things. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, who I am. I'm going to tell you about why I feel I have something unique to contribute to this space, which I feel I do. Hopefully you'll agree. And then I'm going to give you a little preview, hopefully wet your proverbial whistle, into what to expect. So I've outlined a few ideas for videos, and we'll see what happens with that. So without further ado, as they like to say, here is the premiere episode of Doc Dave's Got Feelings. Hey, how we doing? So, my name is Dave. I am late 50s. Okay, 59, I'll be honest with you. Before we get started on this kind of little journey that I'm starting on, I figured I'd give you a brief introduction to me personally. This is separate from the videos and the commentary that I'm going to do, but I just kind of felt that I wanted you to know where I'm coming from and why I think I have something unique to offer to this space. So, welcome to my space, my hovel little studio. So my name is Dave. As I said, I'm 59 years old. Not particularly good at the relationship thing. So twice married, twice not married anymore. I do have children. They are completely off limits, by the way, but I do have them. They vary in age, so just keep that in mind. In terms of me personally, I was born in England, believe it or not. My parents are from India. My father from India, my mother from Pakistan. I was born in England, as I said, 1965. That's right. Right in the height of Beatlemania. Lived there for 10 years, right before my 10th birthday. Was really big into soccer. And right before my 10th birthday, actually for my 10th birthday, my team was going to play in a European championship in the Netherlands, in front of Frans Beckenbauer, who at that time was one of the best players in the world. And unfortunately, my father got transferred. I had to quit the team and we moved to Canada. And I was pissed at him for years for that, because Frans frickin' Beckenbauer, for those of you old enough to remember. So we moved to Toronto, 1975. Next year, that'll make 50 years of living in Canada. So I grew up in Toronto. And from 10 on, everything important, everything in terms of human development, which we'll be talking about later on, that happened in Canada. Canada is as much a part of me as England is a part of me. Now, why do I bring this up? Because something interesting happened in my early 20s. In my early 20s, I had graduated, got an undergraduate degree in psychology, and went to graduate school. I went to graduate school in Kent, Ohio, at the wonderful Kent State University. This is my early 20s. I moved to Ohio pre-J.D. Vance. Thank the maker that he wasn't a blip on the political radar way back in the 1990s. Now, what was fascinating to me, admittedly, in the beginning, annoying, but what was fascinating to me was that for the first time in my life, people looked at me, heard my last name, Lopez, and they thought, oh, he's Hispanic. I used to get Spanish language ads from AT&T. I still get Spanish language ads from AT&T. Interesting thing, not Hispanic. Remember? India, Pakistan, South Asian. I grew up 10 years in England, rest of my formative life in Canada, where there are huge South Asian communities. In fact, I would say at that time, maybe even today, larger South Asian communities than the traditional type of Hispanic communities you find down here in the United States, where I've lived now for over 30 years, over half my life. So I was confused. How could somebody look at me and not know that I was South Asian? I know I'm South Asian. Everyone I grew up around knew I was South Asian. But apparently, nobody south of the border knew I was South Asian. How could somebody hear my last name, which is extraordinarily common as a South Asian name, not just a Hispanic name or Portuguese name, and not know that it was a South Asian name? Admittedly, as I said, a little bit, annoying, but also rather curious, because it spoke to my identity. How could somebody look at me and not know what I was, not know who I was, not know my identity? And then how others see me, how does that shape my view of who I am and what I am? Now that, my friends, that is a social psychology question, and that is what I am. I'm a social psychologist. That is what I went down to Kent State University to be trained in over 30 years ago. And in many ways, that was the first social psychology question that I asked or independently generated on my own. And second, that was a moment when I realized I'd probably chosen the best or the most appropriate, shall we say, profession for me. So, why do I bring this up, this issue of identity, and how for 30 years I've lived in a place where people in general have no freaking clue what my identity is, and for the most part, little inclination to actually figure it the fuck out. I bring it up because it focuses me. It is why I have such a unique take on what I do for a living. It's why I have a unique take on the impact of race, the impact of ethnicity, the influence of systemic racism, human behavior, social psychology. Is why I have a unique take on the relationship between North American psychology, which, if you've ever taken a course in North America, you would not be wrong in assuming that is the dominant theoretical take on psychology throughout the world. I'm here to tell you it's not the only take of any form of psychology throughout the world. And in many ways, psychology, especially experimental psychology, from a theoretical and practical perspective, is practiced differently, not better, not worse, just differently in other parts of the world. And there are questions that are studied and looked at in other parts of the world that are not looked at here, and that should, to be perfectly honest. And so there's no reason why a North American perspective should be the dominant perspective governing the entire frickin' planet, but it is. So I bring that perspective. I am a conundrum. I am, to parrot one of my idols, Sarah McLachlan, I am a mystery. And I use myself as a model to show my students the benefits, admittedly not 100%, but the benefits of just taking a little bit of time to dig beneath the surface, of not relying on the social visible tropes that we automatically used to judge others. Our brains have evolved, and we have evolved mechanisms to make snap judgments about others. And in the evolutionary environment, over time, they make sense. We use skin color, we use gender, we use, I can't tell you when my hair is really, really long, how from behind, how many people think that I'm female. Even the principal at my kids' school, when they were younger, it was very funny. I turned around and said, what? My voice and the beard didn't give away that I was male. He was not happy. But I digress. We have evolved these mechanisms. We can't get away from them. They're there. And they happen automatically. We don't even think about them. And we make judgments about them. In fact, my area of specialty for the last 30 years of study has focused on social judgment and how we make judgments about others. And one of the many insights, in fact, you could even say this is the most common bias that my field has identified in terms of social judgment, is that we just don't think. It's not that we think too much, it's that we don't think enough. And there are reasons for that. Over the course, hopefully, of more and more videos, if these are popular, then we can get into the whys and the wherefores and wherehows. But the idea is that we just don't think. And if we took time to actually stop and say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, then maybe we might get it. We might move as a collective culture further down the road to everybody getting a little bit more of what they want. Now, this idea of we just don't critically think or allocate enough, as they say in my field, cognitive resources to thinking about and making judgments about others, that's at the crux of how I approach everything I do in the classroom. It's why I focus on critical thinking. It's why my classes are focused not just on that, but on fostering curiosity and, dare I say, a healthy dose of skepticism. In fact, skepticism is in one of my papers, my most famous papers. This idea of critical thinking, curiosity, skepticism, it underpins everything that I do, from an academic sense, personal sense. To be perfectly honest, been a little less successful in implementing that in my personal life, believe it or not. But that's the approach I want to take with these videos. So with that less than brief introduction, let's get into Dave's Got Feelings. Hey, welcome back. So we've seen a brief introduction and just a little bit about me personally. For the rest of the video, what I'd like to do is just go into some of my professional background, itty bitty bit, and then give you a little preview of some of what I've been writing over the last couple of weeks, just some topic introductions. And of course, some of them may change, some of them may be dropped, but just give you a sense of what to expect as we move forward. So, as I've said before, and you'll hear me say it again, with no further ado, here we go. So what am I, you ask? I am a psychologist. Now, psychology is an extraordinarily broad discipline. Lots of subdisciplines within psychology, and within a given subdiscipline, lots of subdisciplines within that. I received my PhD back in 1993, or at least that's when I graduated. I started studying psychology in my PhD back in 1989. So last century, it is a growing and evolving discipline. It has obviously changed by leaps and bounds in the 30 years that I have been researching as a psychologist, as well as teaching psychology. So what I'd just like to do is briefly go through what my areas of training are and how I feel they're relevant to the discussions that we'll have moving forward. So as I believe I mentioned before, this is probably my favorite quote from my field of study, which is social psychology. The behavior engulfs the field. Again, we make judgments about others based solely on what we see. We do not see context. We do not take into account context. All we see is behavior. And we do not understand, appreciate, or take into account the broader context within which that behavior occurs. That being said, as you can see, the little cross there, you can assume that that's an individual, and these are all of the things that are going on at the same time. We have emotion, we have cognition, we have physiological states of being. We have all of that impacting one another as well as it's impacting on behavior. And we have environment, huge things. So, for example, one of the examples I give on the impact of environment, and we have absolutely, it's automatic. We don't think of it impacting us. But for example, let's say that I'm watching a baseball game, which, God Almighty, I love doing. And my friend is like 4 people down from me. And I look over and I say, hey, Phil, pass the fucking French fries. And of course, Phil pass them down. Don't even think about it. But let's just say I am sitting around my mother's Thanksgiving table for dinner. What do you feel would happen if I said, hey, Ma, pass the fucking mashed potatoes? Behavior, thought, tone of voice, language automatically changed without even thinking about it. Because if you were brought up like me, you use that word in front of your mother, probably not going to be met with the best of responses upon you. Although, as I get older, because I am pushing 60, my mom's a tad more expecting of my liberal use of colorful metaphors than she was when I was a child. Hopefully you get the context. The idea, the context, without us even thinking about it, can shape, mold how we feel, how we think, how we act, how we behave. Important insight from social psychology. Now, before I get into things in a little bit more detail, just to note, there are essentially 2 branches of psychology, one of which I'm not that familiar with and will likely not talk about or deal with that much, and that is clinical psychology, psychological disorders, treatment, that kind of stuff. And that is roughly, I'd say, maybe half of psychology. It certainly is, when I tell people I'm a psychologist, what people automatically assume. But I am not. I'm not a clinician. I do not work with people. I have absolutely no inclination whatsoever to figure out mentally what is wrong with people or how to fix it, partly because I do not have the emotional temperament to deal with that. But what's important when we're looking at this is the clinical side of psychology and my side, the experimental side of psychology, are now closer together than ever. And on the right side of this model, or left, depending upon how you're looking at the slide, is how we're coming to conceptualize the human condition. And the model that we use, that we approach, that separates us from, say, like an MD, a doctor, is that we take into account what's called a biopsychosocial model, that there are biological underpinnings of behavior, that there are psychological underpinnings of behavior, and that there are social underpinnings of behavior. And all of those together interact and influence physiological, psychological health, as opposed to an MD, in which the traditional medical model is forget about all of this stuff except biological, because everything can be reduced down to a biological underpinning, which is one approach to doing it. I don't personally agree with it, but that's one approach to doing it. So that, the clinical side. But that's not where my training and specialty lies. My training is here. So if you go down to the bottom left, you'll see social psychology. That's what I went down to Kent State University to study. And social psychology, very important discipline of psychology, studies how our behavior is influenced by the social, environmental context in which we happen to behave. And partly how our behavior is influenced by others, but also partly how our own beliefs about ourselves, our identity, is influenced, shaped by how others see us. And you can see some areas of study: attitudes, aggression, conformity, social bias, schema, personality development. Very important, interesting areas of study. Now I was also trained in cognitive psychology, because how we organize relevant information about ourselves, how we engage with the world around us from an information perspective, what we decide to take into our minds, how we organize it, how we process it, how we learn, how we communicate, how we remember, all of that is cognition. And that's a very important part of social psychology. Schemas have a cognitive component. Beliefs have a cognitive component. Attitudes have a cognitive component. So I would argue that contemporary, at least, social psychology requires an understanding of cognitive psych as much as it does historical social psychology. So my training ended up being in what is called social cognitive psychology, looking at the information processing underpinnings of traditional social behavior. Now, as my graduate work completed at the end of the last century, it became painfully obvious to me that there was a limitation, dare I say bias, in social psychology. And that bias was that social psychology largely was conducted, at least the research perspective, was largely conducted on a sample of convenience. What was that sample of convenience? College undergraduates, individuals between the ages of 18 to 24, and not all individuals between the ages of 18 to 24, individuals between the ages of 18 to 24 who were in largely four-year public or private universities, post-secondary institutions. I was interested in understanding how the things that I was studying, the processes that I was studying, how they developed before the ages of 18, how they came to be that way when I was studying the 18-year-old in my lab at Kent State. And then after the student graduated from Kent State, they had the overwhelming majority of their life left to live. How was that stuff going to change in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 70s, 80s over the course of their lifespan? So I wanted to figure that out. So I got some additional training. I went over to Europe to a place called the Max Planck Institute for Human Development, and I studied for 2 years at the Center for Lifespan Development in Berlin, Germany, where I studied lifespan development. So I have additional training in that, largely because I realized that although I had an extraordinarily strong research and methodology and statistical foundation in social psych and cognitive psych, developmental psych, and particularly lifespan development psych, completely different kettle of fish, so to speak. I needed to know more, and I needed to learn more. I needed to learn and broaden my research tool base. I needed to know different ways of conducting research, different ways of conducting both qualitative and quantitative research, but also statistics. So I needed to broaden my toolbox if I was going to answer the questions or investigate the questions about social psychology over the course of a lifespan, from early childhood right through to late life, that I was interested in asking. And with relatively different levels of success. We can get into that later if you're interested in finding out. Let's just say that North American psychology as an institution practiced at the university level, they tend to be relatively siloed in terms of their discipline. So these three disciplines, developmental psychology, cognitive psychology, social psychology, they didn't talk to each other 30 years ago, and they're sure as fuck don't talk to each other now. It's actually rather sad, narrow-minded, and short-sighted, but that's just the state of the beast. But we can get into that, as I said, a little later on down the line, if you're interested in hearing about that. So this is what I'll be bringing to my discussions as we move through the topics that, and you'll see some of the topics that I'll bring up. How does it relate to my understanding and my research and my work as a social psychologist who's interested in lifespan issues of human development? Which brings me to this. This will probably be my first video, going into a little bit more depth about my voice, what I bring to the party, and why I feel social psychology has a lot to bring to the table. Now that I think about it, this actually may be that video. I'll have to think about whether there's something in addition I can add on top of it. But for argument's sake, let's just say you're listening to this video right now. Congrats, way to go. So what's another idea that I had that I've been writing about? Here's one. I mean, yes, there's a word that I shouldn't use. Let's just say it's Billy Butcher's favorite word. It's also a word that was used a lot on Deadwood for Titus Welliver's character. There's a lot of stuff going around nowadays about toxic fandom, about hate watching. All I'll say is that the critical drinker, it just annoys the hell out of me. Star Wars theory, I mean, if you look at him, he's got that butt chin, which is really annoying. He's got beady little eyes. He's got that long, he looks like a freaking porcupine. He really does. And I can hear him kind of like hissing in the background. But there's a particular type of critique that they engage in that not only do I find personally distasteful, but that I think is just downright harmful to a general community. But it also gets a shit ton of views, and people resonate to it. Well, why is that? Well, there is something within my field that talks about that. It talks about the evolutionary underpinnings of why negative information is just so damn attention attractive. Why not that we actively seek it out, but when something bad happens, all of our cognitive resources, or an overwhelming majority of them, are sent to that particular space, to that particular point in time. Negative social information is always going to be more impactful than positive social information. And as I said, there's a lot of work in evolutionary social psychology as well as traditional social psychology that speaks to that, and why that's the case. And people like Star Wars Theory and The Critical Drinker, they do a very good job of using that principle and manipulating the fact. Who knows what they really think? In fact, I don't think they care. What they care about are clicks, views, making that big YouTube money. So they're going to go as negative as they can push the envelope being. So that's topic 2. I'll talk about that, the broader context of critique. There are some people in there, other people whose videos I'll talk about that say things much more eloquently than I do. And one thing that I will focus on in this is that it is really upsetting to me that a bunch of mealy-mouthed white dudes keep running down anybody who's not white and who's not male, who happens to be a lead main focus of a story in Star Wars. And I love Star Wars. I was there opening day, episode 4, before it was called episode 4. Me and my bud Byron, unbelievable. I have been living and dreaming. If you could see my whole wall behind me, you'd know. I've been living and living, breathing Star Wars since 1977. And consume just about every form of Star Wars media there is. And it is upsetting to me that an entire galaxy, let's just take off the table the fact that it's a story. It's not real, dudes. But let's take that off the table. The fact that in an entire galaxy, there is not place in these critics' eyes for something other than a white dude with a phallic saber? Man, that's just sad. Just sad, dude. It's just sad. Get over yourself. Anyway, I'm sorry. I rant. I should save all of this for the actual video. Okay, on to the next topic. Topic 3. I started my academic career in 1995. After I came back from living in Germany for a few years at the University of South Florida. I can honestly say that living in South Florida was one of the worst experiences of my entire life. Now, that's just me, personally. I did not enjoy. I loved the students. I always loved the students. The students were amazing. In fact, I'm still in contact with some of the students from my time way back last century at the University of South Florida. What I did not like was the environment of living in South Florida. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the traumatic experiences I had working at the University of South Florida at Fort Myers, which doesn't exist anymore. And I can honestly say that as bad as you think Florida is now, particularly if you're liberal, as I am. Sorry if you hadn't figured that out. It was always that way, and the people running that damn place now are the children and the descendants of the assholes who were running it 30 years ago when I was living there. Which is interesting because for me, it presents a dilemma. So I love Chelsea Green. I love wrestling. And Chelsea Green was giving an interview, and she said, and she lives in Orlando, as a lot of WWE superstars are wont to do, because that's the headquarters. So they all live near headquarters. Makes sense. Astronauts live near Houston. If you work for the World Wrestling Entertainment, you're going to live near the Performance Center, which is in Orlando, or in and around Orlando. So, if you know anything about fellow Canadian, Chelsea Green, you know, she's pretty liberal. And she talked about how she personally feels a little uncomfortable about living in Florida with her hubby, the Matt Cardona, because liberal's not a word you would use to describe Florida. So what she does is she always wears rainbow gear, rainbow colored gear, when she wrestles anywhere in the state. And I'm thinking to myself, Chelsea, darling, you're living in a state where a recent law allows officials in your state to take away my child from my custody because your state disagrees with my support for their identity. And you still choose to live there. That's a line I won't cross. I used to work at the University of South Florida. I love Star Wars. I have not gone to Galaxy's Edge. I refuse to set foot in the state of Florida. I refuse to work for a Florida institution. I refuse to consult for a company that is based in Florida. Why? Because that's a line that I won't cross. Absolutely, I won't cross. Other people have to make their own choices. But where's that line? Where's that line between your own personal beliefs and what you engage in? And it's a great example of what, in my field, we've known for decades, which is that there's no such thing as a one-to-one correspondence between your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior. They do not align. They do not make sense. They are not rationally, logically related to one another whatsoever. And that's what we will get into when we talk about this. How can you be a raving, crusading liberal who supports diversity and, on one hand, Chelsea Green, and live in the most draconian state in the Union, one that has been since I was there in the 1990s. It has not changed. It will not change. It is unlikely to change. Because if it ain't changed in 30 years, how the hell is it going to change now? Anyway, on to the next one. Topic 4. Two of my favorite people, Freud and Maslow. One thing, I tell you, white European men and personality theory, they sure do love talking about penises. I don't know why. You tell me why. You tell me why. The single biggest theoretical contribution of European psychologists, theoreticians, and even North American psychologists and theoreticians to personality theory is that it's got something to do with penis, baby. Something to do with penis. Even though half of the population doesn't have goddamn penis. Freud figured that one out. He said, oh, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if they don't have one. They envy not having one. And that fucks them up almost as bad as having one fucks up the men. Anyway, say what you want about Freud. There were some good things. There were some bad things. Maslow, however, no good things with Maslow. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is by far the most misunderstood, misrepresented theory I have seen out there. If I see another video titled Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Be the best you can be. I swear to God, I'm pulling out my beautiful, long, curly, wavy, black locks of hair. Why? Because that ain't what the goddamn theory talks about. Maslow's theory, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, does not talk about how to self-actualize and how to become the best you can possibly be. We'll talk about what it actually means because it's pretty goddamn depressing. And guess what? Maslow was not a big fan of women. Really not. So we'll get into what he had to say about them as we move on. So, next topic. This was a conversation that came about with me and my neighbor a little while ago, last week. We were just chatting. Nice guy, a really nice guy, but he's like sniffed so much of the Fox propaganda machine that's coming out of his ears. So he was telling me, we were talking about what to do, just stuff. And he was telling me that he felt that the Constitution gave him the right to individually dictate where his money is spent, tax-wise. I said, no, it doesn't. The Constitution gives Congress broad powers to tax, and then they decide how it's spent, and we can see where it goes. But I don't have the right to say my money goes X, Y, Z. I have the right to put myself in legal jeopardy and say, I don't like what you're doing, U.S. government, so I am not going to pay my taxes. I can withhold all of it, but if I'm paying taxes, I don't get to choose where that money goes. The choice I have is in my vote. The choice I have is to say, I will vote for people who are mostly in line with my own ideologies, my own principles, my own likes, wishes, preferences, and they will vote in line with spending money on those preferences, which is where my tax money will go. He disagreed with that. So I looked up on the phone, my phone, and showed him what the Google results said. To which he then went into a long diatribe on how Google search results are biased, and biased by liberals, because he saw it on Fox News, so it must be true. Shortly after that, we got into a quick discussion about the one, the only, the Barack Obama, my favorite president within my lifetime. And we were talking about the, I don't know how we got on it, we were talking about he was talking about how Donald Trump was right, because he ain't a citizen. And I said, what, his Hawaiian birth certificate wasn't proof enough for you? And without missing a beat, he goes, boom. Do you know how those things can be faked? I can go right down the road here, and I can get me a fake birth certificate, fake social. And it occurred to me in the middle of the street, with the neighbors watching, because we were getting into quite a heated discussion. I almost facepalmed myself, slapped myself in the top of the head, and I was right. An article I co-wrote with my dissertation advisor, Pete Ditto, back in 1992. Motivated skepticism. The idea being that when we are confronted with information that we do not want to hear, that we are motivated not to accept, we automatically come up with a billion reasons, as stupid, ludicrous, and insanely idiotic as they are. We come up with a billion reasons why that information sucks. We are driven, we are motivated to undercut the legitimacy of all information that contradicts our own particular point of view. Pete's gone on to write tons of this work in this area, in the area of politics. So you can go check out Peter Ditto. He's got tons of amazing stuff to read and done great research in that area. But essentially, we'll get into that in a little bit more detail and some of the interesting quandaries it presents when you're trying to have a discussion and you're on one side of the fence, the other person's on the other side of the fence, and all you're doing when you're talking is building up your respective sides of the fence. Here's a couple of new things that I've been working on. So I keep hearing this goddamn word. Superhero fatigue. And I'm here to say, unless the superheroes themselves are tired, and unless Tom Holland comes to me and says, Dave, I'm just really fucking tired of doing Spider-Man movies. I don't want to do them anymore. I'm going to assume there's no superhero fatigue. You know why? Because you put out a good superhero movie, people will go see it. Yeah, go figure. It's got nothing to do with superhero fatigue or people not wanting to see superhero movies. Are there people who have had enough of them? Sure. But the issue is not superhero fatigue. The issue is bad movies, bad writing, bad production. So this is a topic that'll get into that and get into some of the interesting quandaries and mires of that. As an example, I'll talk about someone who's big at Marvel as a writer, although he was just taken off writing Kang Dynasty, or shall I say X-Kang Dynasty, and that's Michael Waldron. I'm not a fan of Michael Waldron. I'll just say it right up that. I don't think he can write female characters worth shit. And when he does write female characters outside of Marvel, he has a nasty habit of writing them into situations where they have to take off their clothes and fuck all the male characters in a particular show. And if you don't believe me, go watch Heels, because that's exactly what happens with every female character on that show. I just think he's not a particularly good writer, male or female, and he's unbelievably bad and sophomoric in writing female characters. So getting rid of him and keeping him the fuck away from Marvel, I think is a good thing. So there's that. And then grapes. Petty grapes. Le bag, because I did grow up in Canada. Le bag of petty grapes. Been seeing a lot of stuff lately about sovereign citizens. Stuff I don't understand. Which is, Arsenio Hall used to say this, stuff that makes me go, So, sovereign citizens talk a lot about how they don't have to obey traffic laws or get licenses or any of that stuff because they don't drive cars. They don't drive. They travel. What the fuck? They travel. That's what they do. I'm really mad at Disney right now. I'll still pay for my Disney Hulu bundle because ultimately it's got Marvel and Star Wars. But I'm really mad because I'm being scammed for paying for a Disney Hulu bundle that really doesn't do what, at least I think, at its basic core, a Disney Hulu bundle should do. So there's that. And the third, I want to get this list up a few more. The third petty gripe, why other broadcast channels that have streaming versions or apps, the show will air first on the broadcast channel and then it'll be available for streaming the day after. Not with the fucking WWE. No. Raw, it's Monday. Raw will premiere tonight. The Raw after Bad Blood. And yeah, that first match was awfully bloody. Raw after Bad Blood. So I don't have cable. I ain't getting cable anytime soon. I don't want to have cable. I got Peacock. You know when that is going to be available on Peacock? The Raw that airs tonight? 5 weeks! 5 weeks, people! 5 weeks from now. Why? Why? Especially when I get all WWE PLEs for free. So we'll talk about that. Or at least I will gripe about that. Why do I have to wait 4 to 5 weeks for a broadcast show to show up on WWE channel on Peacock? But then you know, the upside, I do get all the PLEs for free. So that is just a brief kind of wet chef's kiss. Wet your whistle. I'd like to end by just focusing on 3 things that, for me, not only are the crux of being a good scientist, not just social scientist, any type of scientist, but also they're a good, they're not too bad for life as well. So be humble, my friends. Stay curious. And remember, skepticism is a virtue. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate your time. There are plenty of other places you could choose to go. And hopefully you'll come visit me again. Like, subscribe, and all of them other good things. And hopefully I'll see you again. Ciao.